when we're in these abusive relationships and these relationships end, yes, we're focusing on the healing of who we are and all of those things which we know, but there's the grief side of this that very often we don't understand. Grief is very much misunderstood. Very often we think it should be been and done and gone and we need to get on with things. Massive welcome to Trauma and Narcissism Redefined, your weekly podcast to hopefully give you some inspiration, education, and of course hope that there is light at the end of what can often seem like a long, dark tunnel. In this episode, I want to talk to you about something that maybe we don't talk about enough when we talk about narcissistic abuse and experiencing trauma, and that's grief. And grief is a vital part of our healing process and very often something that we suppress. So stay tuned, because in this episode, we're going to face it head on. Hi everybody, my name is Caroline Strawson and I'm a trauma therapist and coach specialising in all things relationships, things like narcissistic abuse, coercive control, domestic abuse, really helping you heal and thrive after toxic relationships, which very often have come from our experiences in our childhood, and this can be what we then experience as trauma. And really, before I get started talking to you about grief, I need your help, if that's okay. And your help is, I need you to message me, email me, and that's on Instagram, on Facebook. Drop me an email at hello@carolinestrawson.com, because I'm having a bit of a dilemma right now about what to do with this podcast, because I had what I thought was an amazing idea, but I'm really struggling to get this okayed from a legal perspective. And you'll understand why when I tell you. And I'm absolutely gutted, because I think it would be amazing, but I don't really know how to get around it. And I need your help and advice of how can I kind of get around it and still do something like this? Or of course, do you have any other suggestions? So I really wanted to talk next year and rebrand my podcast really around survivor stories of people like you, people like I, who are either in the midst of a toxic, narcissistic, domestically abusive relationship, or have come out, and an opportunity for them really to talk to me about why they might be still feeling stuck, ask me questions about why someone behaves like this. So really, it's almost like an interactive podcast where they're going to ask me questions about behaviors. I'm going to check in with them about why they feel the way that they do, because remember, I work with the nervous system when I work with my clients. So that it's almost like you would be watching or listening to, because obviously all of these are recorded on YouTube too, where you would be watching these survivor stories. And I have no doubt that you would pluck out things that would be relevant to you, because I've done some of these in my private Facebook community group, which again, the link is in the show notes if you want to come and join. And they went down an absolute storm, because it really helps people recognize they're not alone in any of this. Now, I really wanted to do survivor stories, but I'm really coming up against the legalities of somebody potentially sharing something that may or may not be true. And this is really difficult, because again, it feeds into that whole piece of feeling silenced as an abuse survivor, that we can't say our truth, what we have experienced. But again, we have the law in place for these things, and I have to obviously abide by this. We looked at doing things anonymously, so obviously somebody's back of the head could be recorded. We could even have the voice. But again, I know if I'm interviewing somebody, they're going to go and tell their friends and family that that podcast is them. That then opens the risk potentially of defamation and their ex-partner suing them. So I'm in this dilemma of knowing this would be an amazing opportunity, because I know for you to hear these stories, for me to do like a mini therapy session with them about why do they feel like this, about the way that they do, go back to their childhood, talking about sensations, talking about the nervous system, why we keep focusing on the abuser and not bringing it back to ourselves. I know how incredibly healing that would be. But I'm stuck and I need your help. Can you think of some suggestions? What do you want out of this podcast moving into next year? We've kind of rebranded a little bit this year. If I'm being honest, I feel like we've come away a bit from the real core messaging about narcissism, domestic abuse, coercive control, these kind of toxic red flag relationships. And I'm trying to think of ways of helping and supporting you so that it becomes literally your weekly dose that you you look forward to listening to, because it helps you heal and thrive. And this is the point of all of this. I know these podcasts, you're not just listening to be nice to me, or maybe if I'm, have a guest on. It's about you, and I want to help and support you. So I would love you to let me know. Do you have any ideas that maybe I've not even thought of? Maybe you know a media lawyer that could help me with all of this and really how to structure. I've spoken to my lawyer, and it's very difficult. There isn't a hard and fast rule, so to speak. It is a risk. And I don't know whether I'm prepared to take that risk, potentially, not only for me, obviously, as a podcast entity, but also the person that I'm interviewing. I don't want to put them through any more stress and strain. But it does feel really important for survivors to have some kind of voice. And I'm wondering how I could get around this, or indeed anything else. Do you think it's worth talking more about red flags in relationships? For me, as a nervous system expert, as a somatic trauma therapist and coach, I know the value of when I'm in a room with a room full of survivors, and they're, firing questions at me about their experiences, and I'm talking about that, but also bringing it back to themselves, why they feel the way they do, where this may have come from, do they feel good enough, lovable, parents from their childhood, types of relationships that they're attracting, not just also in this, but in their business, in their personal lives, in their friendships. Why? Because this was me. And I didn't know any of this. Narcissistic abuse for me was a catalyst for me to take a good look in the mirror and think, well, why do I feel like this about that? Why do I stay in these relationships? Why do I attract these relationships? Because for so long I was projecting and blaming and not taking responsibility for my own healing. I wanted other people to rescue me and other people to fix me. So please, if you have any suggestions or any ideas about this, I am asking for your help, because I see this as our podcast. Yes, I might be presenting this, but it's service to you, service to help you, because I didn't have anything like this when I was suddenly waking up to the possibilities that I'd experienced an abusive relationship with a covert narcissist. And again, the use of that word is so demonized, and you're not allowed to use that. But I also want to expand that out to talk about this in general too: domestic abuse, coercive control. Some of the key words that you could be using in these scenarios in court to get the results that you want to do, because of course courts don't like the word narcissist. And all of this is trauma, which again, I am a trauma expert. I am a geek around this, and all the trainings that I've done to help and support people heal and thrive after trauma. And many people that I work with that come to me about narcissistic abuse, domestic abuse, or coercive control, betrayal trauma, it is because we go back to childhood every single time, every time. We are working with that nervous system to have completion of survival responses, but people don't understand how their bodies work, how the nervous system works. So it is an educational piece in all of this too, and that's a lot of the stuff I teach in my certification. So, because I believe that's a really important starting point. So I'm putting it out to you. What suggestions do you have? I'm going to rename the podcast. So do you have any suggestions? Please send them in. My email will be in the show notes, but it's hello@carolinestrawson.com. But also drop me a message on Instagram. Drop me a message on Facebook. Please let me know, because I need your help. And I want to do this as quickly as possible into January. This is obviously, we're mid-December now, because I want to help and support you moving into 2025. I want to serve you as much as I possibly can, because I know what it's like to be in these relationships. I know what it's like to feel stuck. And I want to really be that light in your tunnel in 2025 and moving forward. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore. I kind of hope you get the gist of this, the legalities of it, where I'm stuck. I've spoken to my podcast producer. I've spoken to my lawyer. It just feels we're stepping into a realm that maybe we can't step into from a legal perspective, which it kills me to say that, because it feels like we're silencing voices even more. But if you've got any suggestions on this, or you're a media lawyer even listening to this, please drop me a message. So let's go back to today's episode. And today's episode is really about grief. Sadly, I went to my husband's mother's funeral yesterday. So it's all really, really fresh right now. And as I was sat there through the day and And again, the toxicity even surrounding that because of my husband's children and his ex-wife and just the dynamics there. I've always said, if I wasn't doing this type of therapy, working with survivors of abuse, I would definitely work with stepmothers, because boy, oh boy, is that one of the hardest roles you could do. There's a whole nother set of trauma there. It really, really is. So it was a challenge yesterday for me from a nervous system regulation perspective. But watching everybody else and obviously my husband and the grief process around this, and also the grief that it brought up for me about losing my own mum in 2009, I sat there and thought, you know what, I really want to do a podcast on this, literally as I get into my offices the day after. I've got some meetings later on with my team, but I wanted to literally jump on and share this in the raw version coming from yesterday, because grief is very, very much misunderstood. Very often we think it should be been and done and gone, and we need to get on with things. And everybody is different. You know, my mum passed away in 2009. And even yesterday at my husband's mother's funeral, there was so much of more grief coming up for me and emotions being processed from losing my own mother. And when we're in these abusive relationships and these relationships end, yes, we're focusing on the healing of who we are and all of those things, which we know. But there's the grief side of this that very often we don't understand. And for me, I remember when I was going through my divorce, and I really wanted that divorce to come through, let me tell you. You know, that was not a question. It didn't feel at that point that I'd lost the love of my life or anything else like this. But it really felt like I couldn't wait to get my absolute, which here in the UK, you get your decree nisi and then your decree absolute. I couldn't wait to get it in my hands. And I remember going down to our local courthouse on the day that I could get it and asking for my decree absolute. And I remember them handing me this certificate. It's almost like, well done, here's your decree absolute. And I remember where I live in Northampton in the UK, I remember coming out of the courthouse and there was a bench just over the road. And I remember going and sitting on that bench, and I remember looking at this absolute, and I just cried. Oh my God, it was like the floodgates opened. And there was an element thinking, Caroline, why are you crying? This is like a celebration. But actually, I wasn't crying for him. I wasn't crying because I'd lost the love of my life, because I did not think that at that stage. I was crying because of the loss of a life that I'd kind of mapped and planned out when I got married. The loss of the hopes and dreams of having a family unit. The loss of bringing our children up together and celebrating them together. It was this togetherness of this life that I had planned out when we got married that wasn't there anymore. And that for me was what I found really, really difficult. This kind of ending of something, starting maybe of something else. And obviously I'm remarried now, so there's a happy ending to all of this. But in that moment, I felt like my life was over. And because I was in my 40s at that time too, you know, you've probably heard me. If you listen to me, you've probably heard me say this before. I actually sat in a place in my early 40s thinking, he's had the best years of my life now. He had it when I looked my best and I was my best, and it's downhill from now. And I was really angry at him because I felt he'd robbed me of the best years of my life. And of course, I'm 51 now, and that is so not true. It really isn't true. But I felt that at the time there was so much hurt and anger all wrapped up into that moment. I was just bawling my eyes out. I must have looked like this mad, crazy woman sat on the bench. And of course, nobody stopped. We don't in today's society, do we? I would have. If I saw someone crying, I would naturally say, hey, are you okay? But of course, nobody did. And not many people do that anymore. And there was just this real sadness. And grief really comes in stages. You know, you have that initial denial stage, then there's an anger stage, then a negotiation stage, then a kind of depression stage, then an acceptance. But that doesn't mean in month 1, it's denial. In month 2, it's anger. In month 3, it's negotiation. Month 4, depression. And month 5, it is acceptance. And hey, you move on with your life. And this is what I want to tell you. You may be listening to this right at the start of your healing journey. Maybe you are years into this and you're still saying to yourself, oh my God, I'm not moving forward. That's okay. Grief can come up at any different stages. It might be an event where you see everybody else with their partners. It might be in years to come on a Christmas, or maybe when your kids get married, and that can come up, and that is okay. And I think one of the key things that I work with is We listen to the sensations in our body and we nurture them and give space for them in that moment. All too often in our society, we are suppressing all of the time. And then we're wondering why our digestive system isn't functioning effectively, why we're getting diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. We must give space for our sensations and our emotions, because if we don't do that, let me tell you, your body at some point will scream very loudly at you because it will want to be heard. And very often that then is the form of disease, dis-ease in your body. So we have to do that. So really, I want to tell you that you are entitled to grieve. And also when you start your healing process and you start to realize, why was I in this abusive relationship? This should take you back to your own childhood. And then we can have a whole grieving process about the childhood we didn't have. Or maybe the loss of a parent we realize was a narcissist, and the loss of not having one of those parents being the parent we wish that they had. So when we talk about narcissistic abuse, domestic abuse, coercive control, and we're in these toxic relationships, these are really the catalyst for opening the door for our own healing. But with that, there will come hurt and pain and anger and sadness and grief. And that is okay. We need to give space. And the bottom line in all of this is, if you are in an abusive relationship or have been, it is not your fault. This comes from perception, conditioning, interpretation of who we are as that child and the worth we think we have in these relationships. It's not your fault. However, it is your responsibility to start to recognize and take teeny tiny steps at the start in your own healing, because you constantly looking outwardly, blaming others. And that doesn't mean we excuse their behavior. Absolutely not. But we need to stop trying to look at others for them to change and put the blame onto them for how we feel. How we feel comes from our own past experiences. Yes, they are an abuser. We can't change that. But you hold on to the trauma. That trauma is how you see yourself about the experiences that you have had, in some way that it's your fault, that you're not good enough, you're unlovable. Now you may know that you are all of these things, lovable and good enough, but your body tells a different story. Emotions will override logic. And that emotional attachment to who we think we are comes from our parents, our caregivers, and our perception of their behaviors and events that we experience as a child. And that leads to who we think we are. And that means we become magnets to these toxic relationships. Breadcrumbs of love become better than none. Being in these abusive relationships and not feeling good enough is our version of love, because we're experiencing the same physiological sensations we felt as a child. It's familiar to us. But that whole grieving process takes time, it takes understanding, it takes working with our nervous system. And it means grief can come up at any stage. Just like for me yesterday, 15 years after my mother died, I was still there. Yes, I was supporting my husband, but I was also there feeling grief come up for me about the loss of my own mother. Did I feel shame about that? Hell no. I sat there and felt my emotions. I was there for my husband and my 2 children that day, because they felt a ton of grief come up for them, and really emotional because it was their first funeral. They're 20 and 16. And whilst this wasn't their, real grandmother, that was my mother, they still really felt the emotion of the occasion. And also, what would that be like if it was their mum, i.e. me? So I kind of did suppress my emotions during yesterday to be there for my husband and my 2 children. But last night, when I was on my own and I was in the bath, the hot bubble bath when I got home, I landed in that space. I gave space to feel. And the tears flowed. I had a bit of a shake. And I allowed those emotions to be felt. Because if I don't do that, I know, give it a week, and I'd have been ill. My body would have been saying, Caroline, you need to stop, you need to feel, and if you don't, we're going to keep shouting at you. We're whispering now, stop and feel, but if you don't, we're going to shout at you. And this is the work, that embodiment piece, the somatic piece of healing trauma. This is what we need to be doing. So, if you are feeling like you're suppressing your emotions, if you're feeling like you're shaming yourself with still feeling the way that you are, stop. Give space to feel. Allow yourself to feel these emotions. Give yourself space. Give yourself some kindness. You've been through a lot, and it is a lot. Maybe you're still in that. And I just want you to know you're not on your own in any of this. I'm right by your side. There's some resources in the show notes for you as well, for you to come and be part of my community. I don't want you to feel alone in this. I know what that's like. It's not a pleasant place to be. I don't want you to feel like I did for a second longer from the years that I felt like that too. And I hope this has been helpful in you understanding grief is a normal part of this process, and there is no time limit on grief at all. Allow yourself that. Allow yourself to feel the anger. Allow yourself to think, did I need to do anything different? Answer is no, because you couldn't change them, but you do go through that process. It's a natural part of a grieving process. And that isn't just about that abusive relationship, because it will take you back to your childhood when you start to do that deep healing. So I hope this was really, really helpful for you. As always, my inbox is always open. My team and I are here to serve you, to help and support you in any way that we can. And don't forget, podcasts for next year. Please help me. What can I do? Any suggestions? Let me know. Take care, my friends, and I'll see you on the next episode.